Hey there. Thank you for joining in tonight. This is Midweek Encouragement. I am Ronald Rice, your host tonight. So glad to have you aboard as we continue this chronological series through the Gospels, as chronological as we know how to make it. But thank you for coming along on this journey with us. I'm encouraging you to put those emojis down there below to interact with this as much as possible. And we want you to be a part of this, and it's important to be a part of it. And if you have any questions, of course, you can always message me or see me in person. Be glad to have these kind of interactions. Just enjoy it so much. Thank you for coming along on this journey. Put plenty of comments down there, good positive comments. If you're on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. If you're on Facebook, hit that like button, and let's continue to spread the word, the good news about Jesus Christ. So you can help me do that. I know you can. I know you will. Thank you in advance. Let's continue on our journey here to see Jesus. Our current series is called Open, and we want to pick up kind of where we left off last time. We were talking about how the disciples were kind of in that Caesarea Philippi area. We described at length some of the things that were part of that area. We'll get into a little more of that shortly. We talked about the revelation that Peter had. Essentially, Peter says to Jesus, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," and Jesus says to Peter, "You are rock," or Peter. He starts off by saying Simon Bar-Jonah, and then he transitions into Peter. Peter, of course, meaning rock. And then he says, "On this rock I will build my church." And I suppose we could discuss at length as to what the rock is. I would rather, I think, focus more on that statement about Jesus saying, "I will build my church." Now, for clarification, I think the rock is the understanding, and the fact that the Father opens our understanding to Him, to who He is, and His manifestation in the form of Jesus Christ. And but Jesus is the one doing the building. Jesus builds His church. I can't build His church. I don't want to be the one building His church. He builds His church. And He builds His church on our eyes being opened. He can't build a church on those who are just well-practiced and polished. He can't build a church because that would be like the Pharisees. He's not going to build the church on people who are self-satisfied like the Sadducees, or even those who are only interested in themselves, like Herod. And remember, that's what Jesus was saying to them earlier in the boat. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. In another gospel, he includes Herod. That is not what Jesus will build His church on. That is not His church. Now, some churches become one of those things over time, and when that happens, they cease to become His church. Is it our job to build His church? I don't think so. Jesus says He will build His church. From what I'm gathering, it is our job as disciples to make disciples. He will build His church when we make disciples. A disciple lives in revelation that's been given by God. A disciple lives according to what he is shown about God. A disciple invites others to look over their shoulder, over your shoulder, and invites others to come along with you. And their eyes become open little at a time. That's normal. They come and see, and then they follow. And then they continue deeper and deeper until they are completely and totally dedicated to the kingdom of Jesus. They're sold out to Jesus. Now, I want to be clear that the deeper life of a disciple is a challenge. And the challenge of discipleship in the days of Jesus probably wasn't what we typically describe and pursue as discipleship. And personally, I want to get back to that original plan. I want to have that understanding, and I want to pursue him as a disciple the way it was intended. Instead of making disciples, I think sometimes we are more about, or have been more about, creating converts. Kind of give them that get out of hell free card. Or are we doing that? Or are we making disciples that are sold out for the kingdom? I have found that converts come and go about as quickly as they come. And that becomes a problem. Jesus said, I will build my church. And then he said, and the gates of Hades, the gates of hell in some translations, will not prevail against it. Now, this is where my discussion last week kind of applies. If you'll remember, we talked about the region of Caesarea Philippi having that cave, or the myth or the tradition of this cave being the access to the underworld. And in my very fertile imagination, I can see Jesus pointing to that cave while he's saying this, and indicating that not even the spirits of darkness coming out of that gate of hell will prevail against his church, the church that he's going to build. It was a very powerful moment, and it is powerful when there happens this connection between you and God. When an individual has a one-on-one connection with God, it's very powerful. And you have that when you have a moldable and humble heart. And that is all God usually speaks to anyway. He doesn't deal with pride. God dwells with a humble and contrite spirit, people who are soft, not just those who have been through bad things. Sometimes people in those circumstances even become very hostile, untrusting, angry, bitter, having gone through very harsh things. And when you go through harsh things, and we will all go through harsh things, because that's life. It's called life. It will be a bitter experience unless you know the Lord and you love the Lord and you choose to stay soft through all of the difficulties. See, a disciple, the disciples here had been concerned about some pretty trivial things. If you remember, on the way over in the boat, they were worried about not bringing enough bread. And when Jesus was warning them about spiritual matters, they were all concerned about the natural. At some point, however, in this process, Peter must have become a little more serious about all these things. His eyes had become opened. And in this revelation, this is the first time that any of the disciples that we know of, or that's recorded, has actually vocalized the true identity of Jesus when he said, "You are the Son of the living God," indicating the Son of David, or the Messiah. Jesus went on by basically saying, once you're connected to God, hell can't stop this. The spirits out of hell can't stop this. Hell simply cannot stop what God wants to do. Death can't stop this. The grave can't stop this. And these disciples need to know this, because eventually they will die for this kingdom. Horrible martyrdom type deaths, all but perhaps John, not for lack of trying. They will be killed for what they believe and for what they believe they saw in his resurrection. So what is being communicated here is that even their death is not going to stop the kingdom that Jesus is coming to establish. The kingdom then is bigger than they are. Now, we too must have an experience with God that is bigger than we are. We must have more than just academic learning, more than just reading and understanding. We need God to open our eyes. We need that because it's that revelation that is going to live on forever. So not only will the gates of hell not prevail against his church, but he goes on to say that the keys of the kingdom of heaven will be given as well. So special access was given, not because he was Simon Peter, not because of his position or his closeness to Jesus, no, it was because his eyes were open. When we share the kingdom of God, like Peter did on the day of Pentecost, and we do that with other people, we are in effect opening their eyes. Now, understand, some don't want to see it. Troubles me. I don't like that, but it's the truth. And we have to just accept that fact, that there are some people who don't want to see it, won't see it, refuse to see it. And I say that to let you know that Jesus himself did not exhaust himself on, say, the Pharisees who did not want to see it. And here Jesus, you would think maybe he wanted to convince them because they were the religious elites. They were the teachers and the keepers of the law and such. But he didn't waste time with the Pharisees. He didn't try to get them to see it, even when they didn't want to. He didn't spend time trying to change their religious ways to his way. He went instead to perhaps those who were illiterate, those who had already formed their own opinions, which they would have to pridefully maintain. We're not going to be someone who's receptive to his kingdom. That's not the way it worked. So there are the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And then he says, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. The point of this is really that there is power, that there is supernatural, eternal power if we will find our eyes opened. We have to be willing to get our eyes off of other things in order to be open toward Jesus. We have to get them off of those things that are infiltrating and distracting. And then he tells his disciples, after all of that, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody about this revelation. Don't do that. And truthfully, there are some things that God will reveal to you that is not intended to be posted on your social media accounts. It's not intended to be out there in the public. Some things are really just better kept to yourself. Some things are just better kept just between you and God. Perhaps, maybe you could tell it to someone else whose eyes are opened. But certainly, you're not to force this revelation onto just anyone, because not everything is intended for everyone. Peter, for instance, was not expected to go running to the Pharisees and tell them, hey, don't you understand? Jesus is the Son of the living God. He's the Son of David. He is the Messiah, the one that Moses prophesied about that would come like him. And Peter doesn't do that. And in fact, Jesus was telling them all not to do any such a thing, because that's not how this works. Because each individual has to get this for themselves. See, that's why you don't have to go overboard when you're teaching people the truth. You don't have to beat somebody with the truth, like a 10-pound King James Bible, and you don't need to do that. Just show it to them. Just show it to them. Sometimes just talking in a conversational manner and sharing scriptures about who Jesus is. You do that, and suddenly somebody that you're talking to might all of a sudden say, "Oh, I've never seen it like that before." Hey, their eyes are opened. It's a revelatory moment, and you can build on that. That's how it's really supposed to happen. The Lord will open their eyes, not me, not you. If someone believes what I believe, because I've somehow convinced them of what I believe, then somebody else is going to come along and convince them of something else, and then somebody else will come along and convince them of something else yet again, and that happens repeatedly. However, if someone can look up and see, really comprehend what the Lord is showing them, then they get it, and their eyes are open. That is something you own, and that owns you. I want to walk with God in revelation from God. I want Him to continually open my eyes that I might see Him for myself. Let's continue reading. We're going to continue here in Matthew. We're in Matthew 16. Let's look at verses 21 to 23. Matthew 16, 21 to 23. You can also find this in Mark, but we're in Matthew. Let's just kind of stay there. Matthew 16, 21 to 23. From that time, Jesus began to show to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised the third day. Then Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord, this shall not happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are an offense to me, for you are not mindful of the things of God, but the things of men." A little bit to unpack here. We got Jesus and his crew. They've left Caesarea Philippi, which just for the sake of understanding, might be in the area of the Golan Heights, common contemporary area. It would probably be called that. And they've left there. They're heading back toward Galilee, and they're entering into Galilee. And here Jesus chooses to tell them quite plainly that he's going to go to Jerusalem, that he's going to suffer many things, be killed, but also that he would be raised from death on the third day. That was what he's telling them. He's preparing them for what's about to happen. And in Matthew's record, it just says that Jesus said these things. If you look into Luke's account, he actually uses much of the same wording, but ascribes it as a direct quote from Jesus. So some things to consider with all of this. If we fast forward from here to the third day after the crucifixion, that resurrection morning, and you got the group of women that were there. Luke names them. There was Mary, the mother of James, and another Mary, and Joanna, and some others, a whole group of them. They're at the tomb. They go there for preparing the body better, because men had prepared the body before to try to get it quickly into the tomb, and every woman knows if a man does a job, then she needs to come around and get it fixed and do it better. Just file that away somewhere. So the ladies are there, and they're at the tomb, and angels show up and met them there and reminded them of what Jesus said in what we just read. He's reminding them specifically of that moment when Jesus told them he was going to go to Jerusalem, he's going to suffer, he's going to be killed, And he's going to raise from the dead on the third day. So what does that tell us? Apparently, that women were part of the entourage that Jesus was traveling with, because apparently they were there when Jesus was saying this as they're going into Galilee. So the group that was with Jesus wasn't just the 12. It was quite a group. And so they're part of that entourage when Jesus is saying these things. Now, let's see. Let me make sure I get back to my notes here. It was only when the angels reminded them that they remembered the words of Jesus about all this. I guess just an interesting thing to file away there. So, meanwhile, back in Galilee, what happened after Jesus tells them about what he's about to get into? Because he just openly proclaimed that he was going to be handed over to the chief priests, scribes, elders in Jerusalem, suffer many things, be killed, raised from the dead on the third day. And now, I'm going to give him some credit. Peter showed a little tact here. You know, normally Peter just spouts off and doesn't think. But in this case, he at least shows a little bit of tact. I don't know, maybe he's learning some things along the way. He didn't just blurt everything out and say what came to his mind like he has on other occasions. But instead, he takes Jesus to the side and speaks to him somewhat privately. Now, for me, I can see Simon Peter in my fertile imagination. I can see him putting his arm around the shoulders of Jesus, walking up to Jesus, puts his arm around him, turns him a little bit aside to just speak to him somewhat privately. And what does Peter do? Peter rebukes Jesus. Far be it from you, Lord. Lord, I like that. He's recognizing who he is, and yet, can you imagine rebuking God? I can't. I just, far be it from you, Lord. This shall not happen to you, with an exclamation point in the scriptures. Understand, this is not normal behavior from a disciple. It is unheard of behavior. A disciple does not rebuke his rabbi. So, what Jesus said must have been particularly offensive to Peter. It really bothered him that Jesus would say these things about suffering and dying. No, you can't do that. Maybe it's because the whole message was about Jesus. And if Jesus dies, the message dies. I don't know. Maybe it's just Peter thinking of Jesus submitting himself to those things, and he loves the Lord and he doesn't want to see him. We can't really speak to his motivation. But it obviously bothered him a great deal, because this is way outside of normal behavior and outside of acceptable behavior for a disciple-rabbi relationship. And Jesus has a few things to say in response to Peter's offended sensibilities. And you might call it a come to Jesus meeting, where Jesus is going to teach Peter a few things about how the kingdom works. Because Peter had missed a thing or two. He'd missed something. Matthew records that Jesus turns toward Peter. And Mark records that Jesus actually turned toward his disciples. And obviously both can certainly be true. But why? What's the positioning of all of this? How did that happen? Well, we have to understand a disciple never walked alongside their rabbi. Just didn't happen. One of the best compliments someone could be given was something along the lines of, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. That would infer that you are following behind the rabbi. They always walked behind the rabbi, and they would have always walked behind Jesus. A disciple would never think he is on the same level as the rabbi. And certainly, he would never be ahead of the rabbi. But what has Peter done? Peter stepped ahead here somehow. And that is why and when Jesus tells Peter, "Get behind me." How often does something like that happen in churches today, I wonder? You know, when people in general kind of step outside of what God wants for His church, even a local church, when people step outside of the preparation of the apostles and prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers, when they do that, when they get outside of those things, the order that God has established, then people are out of order. Just something to think about through all this. Here in the Gospels, Peter has in essence been attempting to step ahead of Jesus and disciple Jesus. I know that sounds ridiculous to us, but in that moment, that explains why Jesus would say, "Get behind me," but he included Satan, which is something else. He calls Peter Satan. No, not only do you need to get behind me, but you are a tool of Satan right now. That had to be pretty tough for Peter to handle. It was necessary, but tough. Was it not Peter that had just had this great revelation? And now Jesus is calling him Satan. I would call your mind to the entire context here. Jesus had warned them of the leaven of the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and Herod. Why? Because those people were testing Jesus in the same way that Satan had tested him. Well, when did that happen? Well, that was in the wilderness, right after a great revelation. "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." Remember the voice from heaven? And then he's ushered by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested or tempted. Now, we've got "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." And then comes a severe testing. As much as we may love having some great revelation from God, just be ready for the attack that follows. In this moment, Satan shows up in the form of a brother. And this was the one, Peter, who was often the most outspoken. He was part of the inner circle, the in group. He was one of the top three, if not the top of the top three. And Jesus calls him Satan. Well, can he still bind and loose? Does he still have the keys of the kingdom? Well, I would say yes, as long as he's functioning within that great revelation, absolutely. But when you walk in human vision or in satanic values, you don't have that authority anymore. And in that case, you've stepped outside of order and out of the kingdom. I have once again run out of time. This might take a little more than our normal 4-week situation, but that's all right. Thank you for joining tonight and for being here and walking this journey with us. It's such a pleasure to have this time with you. Please make sure you are following through with all the different comments down below, no matter when you're watching this. Do that and take your notes and get your questions to me whenever you'd like to do that. Be glad to have some discussions with you about any of these things. Thank you so much. Until next week, when we once again come together for Midweek Encouragement, same time, same place, I'm asking you to make sure you love God first and foremost. Love your neighbor as yourself. Fast, pray, give generously. And now you go and make a disciple.